grandfather, George Warren Brewster, came to the Tongue River Valley to look for the last herd of buffalo. Found the herd and got himself a buffalo, but in the meantime he found a place he really liked along the river and built a cabin here and settled, started ranching. Married my grandmother, Grace Sanborn, who was a friend of Mrs. Kendrick's that lived in the area. She'd come to visit her, and they had 3 sons, George Warren and Burton and Lyman. And then my grandfather died when the boys were just young, right after the house had been enlarged. So my grandmother ran the ranch after that, and they had good years and bad years, and took in dudes during the bad years.
I guess it probably started with the Powell family, who Mr. Powell and his wife owned mercantile stores in Mississippi, and they had 3 daughters, and 2 of those daughters, probably in the early 1900s, came to this area, and ultimately 2 sisters married 2 brothers. Their names were Joe and Albert Brown, and Joe and Albert married Willie B. and Anna Mae. They entered into the ranching business here in the Tongue River Valley and formed what later became the Brown Cattle Company.
I think we're probably the last undiscovered area, put it that way. It's a unique area, but you know, we meet a lot of people with our horses and so forth, and they say, "Where are you from?" Well, you say Birney, Montana, and everybody has the mindset that eastern Montana's flat. You know, it's this type of country, and it isn't. It's very diverse.
Just 3 of us, 3 of the generations have lived right in this house. I'm the 3rd generation, but there's 5 generations of us here. So.
Well, my family in this country started with Captain Brown. And Captain Brown was in the military, and he came through this country and liked it, and so he homesteaded it. But he still had 2 years in the service, so he sent his brother out here to hold the lease on it. 1886, my great-great-grandfather got out of the service, so he came back to here and started the 3 Circle Ranch. The 3 Circle Ranch was down the river from where it is now. There's a cross fence there that goes down to the river. You can see where the buildings were. It's kind of interesting, the quarter circle U, the Brewster took the main house of the Browns and made a bunkhouse out of it. And that's what their cookhouse is now. It's the old Brown house.
Apparently the original log cabin was right here in this yard somewhere, I'm not sure where. And then after he got married, he built a 2-story log cabin. And that's part of this house.
But this was the original homestead, and they lived here from about 1884 to 1904. You can't see it from the trees there, but there's a big flat, about 200 acres of ground right there on the other side. According to what my grandfather told me, the old Indians told him that that was their favorite, one of their favorite winter campgrounds because you couldn't see it from a distance. It was down on the river with hills all around it. And you go up, there's some teepee rings back up on these hills. This is where my great-grandfather originally started. Him and his brother homesteaded. They came up here in 1884. And they settled right here in this spot. His brother Ed stayed here. And my great-grandfather went back and assembled the trail herd and brought it back up in 86. And that was kind of when they started. And he made several other trips up here with cattle from Texas. My grandfather said at the first stock growers meeting in Montana, he said he was just a boy, but he overheard his dad say, he said, I'm not sure how many cattle I have, but it's somewhere between 15 and 20,000. They ran from the Bighorns to the Yellowstone to the Little Missouri, you know, and down as far as Gillette. They actually went down as far as the North Platte to get cattle that had drifted in the winter. And that fall, he watered his horse in the Yellowstone riding up there. So you can imagine the amount of ground they covered.
The father of those Brown boys, Joe and Albert, was a fellow named Captain Brown, and he had been a surveyor for the railroad in Texas. And when he came up here and started the ranch and had his family going and whatnot, since he had surveying expertise, Scott and Hanks hired him to survey this irrigation ditch on this ranch. And the irony of all that is that they built the ditch in, I think it was 1886 or 7. Gravity flow irrigation ditch runs the entire length of the ranch, surveyed by Captain Brown for Scott and Hanks. That ditch ultimately wound up having the first water right on Tongue River in Montana, which I still have.
The Brewsters came a little before the Browns, I think. I know Mrs. Brown was the only white woman in this country for a long time. The ranchers, all except the Brewsters in this area, are all from the South and we're all related. You don't want to say anything about anybody in our community.
The first people came here for the grass. Like Captain Brown came up here, I think first in around 1883, and saw that the grass was here and an opportunity. So in 1886, he brought the three-circle cattle up from Texas. They drove them up here and then started a homestead. And that's how my grandmother and her sister, Mrs. Cox, happened to come, because they were first cousins to Captain Brown, and they came up to visit. And subsequently, my Aunt Mamie, she was Mary Roberts. My grandmother's sister met Mr. Cox, and my grandmother met Lou Alderson, who was a cowboy. And the Aldersons came up from Atchison, Kansas, and I think my great-uncle Walter Alderson came up with the trail herd first, and then my grandfather came up with him to Miles City, and then they homesteaded. And my great-uncle Walter Alderson, his story is told in Aunt Nanny's book, A Bride Goes West. And grandfather homesteaded down here where Bunny is now. That was his homestead. And so it was grass and cattle at that time. And my grandmother died when my father was about 6 years old. And so my great aunt, Mrs. Cox, my grandmother's sister, took my father and his two brothers to raise, and she had 4 boys of her own. So 7 boys were raised on this ranch. And when they would get big enough to ride horseback real well, and they would go to work for the Brown Cattle Company is horse wranglers to wrangle horses, and they'd be about 12 or 13. And the first one to go, of course, was Percy Cox, and he worked there. And then when Floyd, my uncle, was big enough to wrangle horses, he went to work there. And he was a little skinny and drouthy little kid from a side creek, and they called him Skin and Bones. And then the name changed to Bones, they called him Bones. And then when my uncle, who was Alan Alderson, he was the next in line, and when he came to work there, he was a huskier lad, and they called him Big Bones. And then when my dad came along, they called him Little Bones.
No, there's lots of history in these old rocks, and then you know, and a lot of the rocks out around here will have some stuff carved in them too. So I find, you know, new carvings every year or so when I'm riding out here, and you'll find some old names and stuff. Well, originally this place was homesteaded by the Zooks and the Aldersons. And then in about the 1890s or early 1900s, my great-grandfather, Captain Joseph T. Brown, bought it. And he started building this house in 1903 or 4. It was completed in 1904. The stonework is amazing, and the amount of work that went into these houses is really a fantastic thing. But they didn't build this house out of frame because it was more expensive to haul the lumber from the mountains than it was to quarry the rock. But that's how come they made it out of rock. And it's the old southern style because they all came from Mississippi. Big house, high ceilings, lots of windows, and it was quite a house for its time, I guess. It had 13 pot-belly stoves, the kitchen stove. It took one person. All winter they used to have one person that just kept the fires going to keep it warm. Of course, there's nothing like insulation or anything, you know. My grandfather said that the bread would still freeze in the pantry.
At that point in time, the girls were out here, me and Annie Mae, and my grandmother was still in Mississippi. And married, and then lost her husband, and then the financial difficulties were developing out here. And so I think I assume a point in time came where she was a widow, she had a small child. Their father was a very astute businessman in Mississippi, and they just made a decision, as my brother said, for whatever reason, to combine their resources and their finances and all come. And my great-grandfather, William Powell, W.B. Powell they called him, dressed in a three-piece suit with a gold watch in his pocket every day of his life. He never, to my knowledge, I never saw him anywhere near a horse or ever in anything but a three-piece suit. And he was the financial manager. He would go out in the mornings and inspect, and he had the old adding machine. He kept everything on ledgers, and he ran all of the financial aspects of these ranches. So when he came with his money, he came with his money.
Most of the financial difficulties occurred before 1949 and before the split up. So it was all held within the Brown Cattle Company, but I think the Brown Cattle Company actually went totally broke 3 times. And of course, one of them was, well, I shouldn't say totally broke, but they got into serious difficulties. The price of cattle, but terrible winters, killed hundreds of thousands of cattle and in a bad winter, and then have prices go, and then have drought or fire or whatever, and they just weren't capable of absorbing all those issues at once or whatever. And I don't even know what all the financial conditions were that existed that caused them to have such difficulty. But I think whatever they were, they occurred 3 times. And at one point, obviously, Mr. Powell came to the rescue. But even when he was here involved, they went broke again. And I know he went out and essentially sold stock to prospective. There's a prospectus on the Brown Cattle Company stock that was out in the world in the 20s or 30s, and so he was out selling stock to the Brown Cattle Company to try and revive it, and each time he was essentially successful in doing it.
The barn wasn't built until 1918. After my great-grandfather had died, my grandfather and his brother built the barn. And everybody said, well, they built that big, expensive barn and went broke in 1921. Well, the winter of 1919 is what finished them off. And they lost everything because all the stock died and stuff. But it wasn't because they built the barn. The barn cost $10,000 in 1918. This whole barn, I mean, it's really unique, and there's a lot of history carved in the barn. You know, I guess what really makes the barn is the buffalo skulls. Those that you can see where they designed them right around them, and I don't think you could get another buffalo skull to fit the holes that those buffalo skulls are in. I mean, they were designed into the barn. We'd like to restore it. It's such a unique barn, but it's totally out of times now. I mean, we can't. We use it to saddle our horses in and store our saddles, and that's about it. But it's huge for a barn built in 1918. Took 3 years to build the damn thing. So they had a lot of country. They ran a lot of cattle here. Of course, there was a lot of other people who ran cattle here too in the open range. But my grandfather, when he was a boy, would leave here in May to go to the Powder River and rep. He would ride with those ranchers over there and brand the 3-circle cattle, and in the fall he'd assemble and start moving them back this way. And then if there was, in the fall, if there was 5 or 6 year old steers that needed to go to market, he'd take them to Belfouche or someplace where there was a train and market them. But, you know, so they'd start them back toward this range over here. But he'd leave here in May, and he said he always tried to make it home for Thanksgiving dinner.
Yeah, they had what they called roundup pools. And those roundup pools would consist of 4 or 5 different drainages that would encompass maybe 30 miles. And they would centrally locate the roundup wagon. And in fact, we've got pictures of 4 different outfits that had the roundup horses and their whole camp and everything. And there was about 5 large ranches that were depicted there. And there was probably 500 or 600 head of horses within a radius of a half a mile on this big flat. But they'd go out there and they'd brand. They'd have two or three fires, and they would brand one person's. They'd get the cows and work all the cows and the pairs out. They'd go in and rope the calves, and they would get the certain brand. When they got done with those, well, they would put them. Throw them in an area, and then they'd get the next brand, and they'd work through that. So everyone got their cattle branded, and then of course as a result, it meant that it was free labor. I mean, you neighbored, you did things on a neighborly fashion to get your work done, and then you would furnish help for the other parties to get their cattle branded.
Our cattle were usually over here on this Indian reservation during the summertime. And they'd sort the 2-year-old steers off and take them along towards Reno Creek over to the rail yards at Benteen.
two drainages of Canyon Creek and from 4 Mile north and south fork of Canyon Creek, and this is one fork. And then as you go on north, there's the head of Prairie Dog, and that's where you know, most of the homestead areas were. And of course, there was probably within a 5 or 6 mile radius, there was probably at least 17, my mother said 17 families.
I was just talking to my cousin who's been digging into the family history, and she said that the Salvesons came and worked in the mines like in Wisconsin and Minnesota, and they were indentured to come and work in the mines. Tom Salveson was the first one who came to Birney. He ran into Mr. Brewster in Miles City, and Mr. Brewster invited him to come out. Tom Salveson, who had been my great-uncle, came with 3 other young fellas from Norway, and then my grandfather bought the ranch that Tom started, and Tom helped him build a house on it, I guess. And then he went back to Norway and brought back his parents and the gal that he married. And she came over and was cooking at the Quarter Circle U just long enough to pay off her steamboat passage, and then they got married. So there's a lot of Thompsons and Salvesons that came and kind of homesteaded up the river. In fact, there were, I think all those people up there on up the river were Norwegians that kind of came from the same part of Norway and all settled up there.
When he came over from Norway, he was in Wisconsin, I think, maybe even Minnesota a little bit. He had friends back there, and how he got from there to here, I don't know. I don't know what possessed him to come out here, but just everybody was coming out here then.
Yes.
The places of the country was opening up and things were taking off, and there'd been people around here about 30 years by then. Well, not quite, 25 maybe, but and it was getting it was pretty well settled by then. All wild stuff was over with, I think, by the time he arrived. Actually, the big Norwegian colony was on Tongue River down there. My other grandfather, old Toby Salveson, was the last one down the river. They were all from there on up past the dam. It was quite a Norwegian community up there. He was assigned to Captain Brown's troop, evidently. But that's where they met each other. And there's always a connection somewhere.
Tom Salveson helped Toby build their house, and I don't remember who built the rock. It was going to be a rock barn, and I don't think they ever finished it, as far as I know. But it was really kind of a neat house, and it was built like they built the houses in Norway.
1902 or 3, they started building out, and they did all this rock work. There was a lot of Scandinavians had moved in the country about the same time, and they were really good at rock work. The old Salverson place up here, they even did their chicken house in rock, and they have the little things where chickens go in and lay their eggs. It was all done in rock.
My mother was raised up there on the Salveson place, and my dad was raised at the Quarter Circle U. They were like 8 miles apart, something like that. And they never met each other till they was 20-some years old. They'd never laid eyes on each other.
Oh.
The communities were that separate. But that was a Norwegian-speaking community up there.
Grandma had her own cattle, and she had her own sheep, And Grandpa made her keep her money separate, and she was to use that for what she wanted to. They had enough to, you know, for both of them to run cattle on it and stuff, and make a living anyway. And they always had lots of extra people at their house. It was kind of the gathering place. She sheared the sheep, she guarded the wool, she made her own yarn and did her own knitting and all of that stuff. So yeah. Mom said it was kind of fun to watch her do it. And Mom said she was wonderful at whenever they butchered. Grandma always did the cutting up of the meat and stuff, that she really knew how to do that. She must have learned that in Norway before she came.
Well, you had to live on it and stay alive, basically, is all you had to do. And that could be pretty hard. This country, the soil tests were good, and it is good soil. But what they didn't bother to tell anybody was the amount of rainfall. You know, there's not enough moisture to farm.
For whatever reason, you know, some of the homesteaders would leave, or, you know, they'd move to a different location, and it would be, you know, most of the kids rode horseback, you know, 3 or 4 miles to go to school, winter and summer. And of course, in the winter time, you know, they'd a lot of times they'd take a bobsled. But and if it got too bad, they never had school. But basically, they would move the schoolhouse to where the most of the closest proximity for everybody to, you know, to go, kind of like the hub of a wheel. You know, they'd move it over here so everyone could come from different directions, the shortest amount of distance to get to school.
Mom said she didn't learn to speak English until she started school. They talked Norwegian at home. And she said the reason that they did was because with her grandma and grandpa living there, they didn't talk English, because then grandma and grandpa thought they were talking about them. So they spoke Norwegian all the time. But Mom could understand a little yet, but she couldn't remember how to talk it. But she said it didn't take long after she went to school to pick up on the English and stuff. But yeah, but I think up there they talk Norwegian most of the time. Grandpa Toby got a pretty good ranch going up there, and when he sold out, he sold half of it to Ned Cox and half of it to Buster Brown. The east side of the river went to Ned Cox, and the west side went to Buster Brown. Grandma and Grandpa tried to get my folks to take it over, and Mom would have liked it very much, but Grandpa Avon talked him out of it, told him that they couldn't make it, and Mom was always mad about that. I think they would have done just fine. But it was a pretty nice place.
Like this little building here, that was somebody's homestead cabin. You can imagine living in that. But they moved it, you know. The homesteads had closed down, and they'd gather up the log buildings and bring them in here and make a chicken house out of them.
My dad and his brother, Big Bones, who was Alan Alderson, they were able to, when somebody wanted to sell their little place, they were able to buy it. They were able to give them cash so they could leave with something, you know. Most of them, you know, you couldn't make a living on 160 acres, which was the original homestead, and then 640 a section, you still couldn't make a living on it. And the only way, the people that are still here were people that used the grass, didn't try to farm.
When the big crash in '29 happened, Kay's grandmother called Avon and Annie in and said, she said, "I can't pay you." I said, "I have no money." She says, "I have no money." She said, "You can either stay here and work for board and room, or you can go try to find a job." And they elected to stay. And they worked all through the Depression for no money. And then when it was all over with and the ranch got back on its feet and things were going pretty good again, Mrs. Arnold wrote them a check for all their back wages, the whole works. So it was pretty nice, you know. But they were almost like family then. You know, they were integrated that close.
Winter 1919 really hurt a lot of people. My family had borrowed, they had 4 ranches in this area at that time. They had a big ranch in South Dakota. And they had borrowed $750,000 in 1918. And that one winter wiped them out. And they managed to keep 3 of the ranches, but they were clear up until the late 1940s paying off that debt.
It was, you know, during 1919 when everyone went broke, well, you know, they did anything that they could. The government furnished real good pedigreed stallion thoroughbred horses. Everybody raised horses. They used them on the roundup, and if they fit the criteria for the government, that was a source of income for them to sell horses for the Boer War and for, you know, for military purposes.
This was a horse ranch at the very beginning. Somebody called Wiley was his last name, owned it before the Humphreys bought it. And so it was a horse ranch even before. At that time, they had quite a lot of horse ranches around. The SH was a horse ranch. And they ranched with Fort Keogh down there, and there's another SH down by Miles City. And they had those studs that they used to breed.
This particular ranch was owned by Scott and Hanks, which were Englishmen, and they're the folks that the SH brand is fashioned after, named Scott and Hanks. There was this ranch, there was one on the Powder River, and there's one up from Miles City, about 30 miles, fairly large ranches.
We sold horses to the Army. We had a remount stallion here from Fort Robinson, some good ones, thoroughbred stallions that we crossed on our range mares, and we sold horses to, the remount would send a buyer here, an Army officer that would approve the horses and buy them. And they'd give us $165 a head for a horse that was 16 hands tall and had good conformation. And that was a lot of money. If they had a few horses, they could winter on that.
And of course, World War I, they had a lot of horses. And they rode horses in the Army, and so everybody raised horses. Not only that, we all needed a lot of gentle horses to ride for the dudes to ride. They'd take the dudes on, like to going up Poker Gym and up to the lookout. Or they'd go to Kirby, or they, you know, they all had their roundup outfits, their tents and their flies and all their teepees. And they just used them in the doo-doo business too. I think a lot of people, like my family went broke in 1920 because of the droughts and the bad winters. So that's about when they started their dude ranching.
Cattle industry was not very lucrative at that time. You know, people didn't have much, but so they did. They started their own dude business, taking Eastern guests and stuff in about as I said before, 1923. And this carried on until I think we quit the business in about 63 and went to just straight cows and calves. It is not by any means the oldest dude ranch in the country, because there's Eatons and Hortons, and but it was one of the oldest here. And other ranches around, like Kay's Ranch, the Quarter Circle U, a lot of these ranches took Eastern people to supplement their income and get them through those tough years. So it was a way that they could survive those hard times.
And in the pictures, you could see the tent houses around the back of the yard where the guests lived, and in the house. They lived in the house too, as many of them as they could put in there. In fact, they made some of the larger bedrooms, I think, into smaller bedrooms during that time. And that went on for, I don't know, at least 10 years, maybe a little longer than that. And a lot of the dudes that came out got to be close friends.
You know, the history, has, different facets of, what the cowboys were like. And I know my mother said that she grew up around cowboys, especially when they were down on the river. There was probably, 10 or 12 hired men that were real reputable, good people and good hands. And she never heard a man swear until after she left home. I mean, they were very gentlemen. They very seldom. I think history depicted them a little different than they actually were, but they were real honest, down-to-earth type of people, hardworking, and enjoyed dances and fun and that sort of thing.
They had a big pool table in there, and in the wintertime, my great aunt and grandmother would say that all the cowboys would come in after supper and they'd play pool, and they had a piano and they'd sing and dance and had a great time, play cards and stuff.
It was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. We grew up at the Three Circle, where we lived there for 10 years. I think I was 2 when we went there. And so there were lots of people around. We always had lots of people. Our house was kind of like Grandma Molly and Grandpa Toby's house. It was always full of people. And we had lots of fun, lots of relatives and lots of just people around Birney. And we had, of course, our community center was the Corral Bar. And we had movies and dances and any social gatherings. That's where they did it. And they had wonderful dances. People came from all over the country to come to the dances at Birney. There were a lot of people around then. A lot of, people working on the ranches, so there were a lot of kids. And our school was, we had 2 rooms and both of them were full, and so there were a lot of kids. It's not like now with 6 kids. Three Circle was a wonderful place to grow up because Joe and B. Brown were kind of like grandparents.
And every ranch had a lot of people. All the homesteaders that bought the homesteads from moved down here and went to work at the ranch and became good friends of the family, plus doing all the work, or helping with all the work. And there were 2 sisters, and they were married and had families. And then there was always lots of extra help. There was 10 or 20 people working here. And every ranch had a lot of people, so there was a big dance in Birney every Saturday. Got dressed and went down there.
They had dances and they had baseball games. I mean, you wouldn't think anything of driving over to Lame Deer in a buckboard wagon and for a dance and a baseball game the next day.
And we had a baseball team, uniforms, a hardball team, good one. And we played different other ranches, and we played the Indians. The Cheyennes always had a hardball team, and they were excellent baseball. They loved baseball. The baseball diamond was in front of the hall, that old hall that's up there. There was a buck and horse shoot. There was on Sundays they had a string of bucking horses, and they'd bring them in Sunday morning, and they'd ride bucking horses, and they'd have a baseball game. And some team would come, some people come to play baseball, and cowboys would come around and ride bucking horses, and then somebody'd rope the milk calves if there were some milk calves. And and have a baseball game, and then they'd eat fried chicken and ice cream. A lot of these boys, I mean, not only were they baseball players, but some of them were polo players and horsemen. And we had a polo team at one time, played with the Bighorn team in Sheridan. And it was an exciting time for young people. We trained hunters and jumpers that we sold back east, and we showed them in horse shows, and they'd have race meets, local race meets. We had racehorses, my dad had racehorses. And so there was a lot going on here. It was a fun time.
When I was growing up, there was 2 bars in Birney and a big dance hall, and every Saturday night they had a dance, and the people from all around would come. They had a wonderful time.
But there was a lot of social activities. I mean, people visited a lot. If someone went to town, well, they would find out what the news was, in Sheridan, and who had babies last fall if they never saw. And of course, church activity was real important to a lot of the folks.
I think the thing that is, as a woman, that's incredible to me is what the women brought to the community. I can recall my grandmother and my Aunt Bee, they subscribed to the fashion magazines. And my Aunt Bee was quite a seamstress, and so whatever the latest fashions were, they managed to get into Sheridan, buy fabric, and whip up the dress without a pattern. They simply created their own. And they were very, very conscious of fashion. And they, all of my life growing up, both with my parents, the Three Circle, and every ranch I knew, none of the women worked in the fields at all. Most of the ranches, including ours, had a cook. Our cook was in the house across the road there, so we ate our meals over there. And the women were always dressed in dresses at 5 o'clock. They subscribed to all of the major news publications, even though we did not have television, I don't believe, until I was 13. They were extremely knowledgeable on world affairs and throughout the community.
Up at the quarter circle U above their dam, the ice would get really thick, and we'd have big skating parties up there, the whole community and stuff. And that's where they would cut ice. They still cut ice yet when I was a kid, and filled the ice houses and stuff. And it was fun.
I mean, when something like that takes place, a roundup or branding, everybody gets together and helps. They didn't do that so much way back in the old days because they had the help to do it themselves when they branded. But the ice cutting was just kind of a community venture. And we had a place over here, we had a dam in the river, and behind that dam was where they cut the ice because it was very thick there. It was great large things of really pretty ice, of just crystal clear, gorgeous ice.
That was, according to my grandfather, was one of the major concerns, whether they could get enough ice. There were certain winters that, were warm in the river. He said the river, actually, ice went out of the river 5 times one year, and they had a hell of a time getting enough ice, and it was a major concern because they did not have any. That was their only way of keeping anything any distance, or like milk and their meat for more than a couple of days. It was the ice house.
Originally, Jack Knobloch, who's my neighbor, lived up the river from me, and he still owns that piece of property, and his son lives there. He moved down the river, so he has the next ranch down the river from me now, which he acquired in the 60s. The line of the Birney community is immediately below his ranch, and it goes no farther. And you enter the Birney community when you cross that line. And perhaps the other line is maybe just below the Chung River Dam at Bill Musgrave's. It's probably the other end of the line, and probably ends at the mouth of 4 Mile Creek. That Hosford's would be in it, and that's the extent of it. And perhaps partway up Odell Creek, include Gary Bull, and I could draw it on a map very definitively and do not cross this line.
I think somebody figured out it took 35 acres to run a cow here. So, and right now, today, they figure to sustain a family, a few years back, somebody said to sustain a family, it took 500 cows. And that figures have changed since then. And at one time, a cow could support dead on land. She can't and hasn't been able to for a long time.
There was lots of homesteaders and people working. All the ranches had lots of help. Now we're the help. I feel like I'm awfully close to the land. I like all the Indian relics and I like the Indians. I have a lot of good friends that are Indians. I just think it's made me a more tolerant person. I like ranches and I like ranch life and I like horses and cows, and I'm definitely one of the ranchers. We sell all over. We sell at sales. We have, at the end of this month, we have a sale in Miles City. I've got the colts out there in the barn getting them ready.
Water is the key to this country. It'll do anything if it has water. I mean, it'll grow grass if it rains, and it'll raise beef and everything, but it takes water. And methane's going to pull a big hole in that water. Big hole. And I don't know how they will, if the government will replace it. If they pull the water out from under this forest, are the taxpayers going to drill wells here? You know, I think of the wildlife. You know, that spring we passed, that tank runs every day of the year. It stays fairly open in the winter. You know, deer and elk can come down and get a drink. And if we have to have a well, who's going to pay for the power to pump that water in the winter? Nobody. And will they do that in a riding hiking area? I doubt it. It'll just become kind of a desert. So it's not being well thought out by our politicians and the BLM. They're not looking down the road. So as a business person, we own a lot of minerals, and we could probably make a lot of money off the methane. And someday we're going to have to deal with it because we're going to be forced to lease like everybody else. Because no one owns enough minerals where they can keep them off, and no one has enough money to keep them out of, take them to court and keep them off. You're going to have to deal with it, but you often wonder what the hell's going to happen to your business afterwards, and whether you can survive. And I don't know. It's going to be tough.
I'm very fond of this area, and I just hope we can keep it. But I'm pretty sure that in the future, we're not going to be able to, with all the things that are threatening us, like the methane and the coal mining and the big ownership of lots of land.
We've always been able to raise enough hay here to support whatever cattle the grass will carry. We irrigate, that's all I do is raise hay. I don't raise anything else. It would be very difficult without the irrigation, though. Some years you'd get a lot of hay, and other years you wouldn't get any. So, but I'm grateful for that. It's a gravity flow irrigation ditch. It has no pump, so I can go open a head gate and have water. Now I have to put some money into the ditch, the upper part of it especially, to keep it clean, so that it will come out of the river even when the river's low.
Well, nobody wants the railroad to come through, but I don't think it's going to happen. And I don't know what they're going to do about the methane. And I think that this ranch could stand some methane money pretty easy. But I don't. Also, it could interfere with these artesian wells that are up here. And I don't like the idea of that. We've got a lot of artesian wells, which are really just methane water, all along the river to water all our cattle. And I think that that could be a problem. The river's very important. And it looks kind of good this year because there's snow in the bighorns and have quite a little water, I think, for a while.
There was a lot of springs that, for some reason now, have dried up. Personally, I think it's that severing the aquifers for the coal mines had something to do with it, because that was about the year that the springs started to dry up. There's a lot of money to be had in the coal, and there's a lot of people that are sold out to the coal, but I don't think that we can ranch and coal mine at the same time. They're using most of everything that we want to use too. The air and the water and the people. The coal mining and the coal-fired generators, they caused a lot of that. There's a big split in the people in the valley. You were either for it or you were against it. And it's still that way, and it split up families. And there's not half the closeness there used to be, say, when I was growing up.
The state is in kind of a flux right now with the methane development, that they haven't changed their philosophy as far as the care for the land is concerned. But I think from a monetary standpoint, people have been divided because it means quick dollars in this sense, but you have to stand back and look at the broader picture and say, well, what is this going to do, to my grandchildren? It might not affect me greatly right today or next week or next month or next year. I might be able to circumvent some of the negative connotations that may come from that, but are the long-term effects going to affect my grandchildren if they want to stay on the property and do what we're trying to do now? Are they going to be able to carry on that tradition? And that's kind of a scary thing to think about.
Most people that grow up on these ranches and make a living off of them are, I think we all have to learn how to accept change. And we also have to learn how to accept that we're not in control of everything. For instance, the coal bed methane, or the railroad, or the coal, or any of that. We all may have our wishes about it, but we're not actually in control of it. And we may even be delusional enough to think that we can control it. And we may be delusional enough to think we can steer it a little bit, but ultimately we don't control it. And so, we just all have to learn how to accept change and go with it. And at least that's my philosophy. And others they don't all look at it that way, but I do.
Just hard to tell about the future. Both of my sons are, one of them's in his 50s, and Tim's getting close to being 50, and without any help, they're getting kind of old and crippled, which you do early in life around here. And so I don't know what'll happen down the line, whether they'll keep the ranch, let it go. Now, it's getting hard again to make a profit. Cattle prices are good, but the price of fuel and the price of machinery and price of new water wells on your hill, all those things eat right into any profit you might have.
I see change coming, as my brother said, and as he said, it's out of our control to a large degree, particularly regarding methane gas because of the checkerboard ownership of the land. And I do not know if, you know, what politics, and it will be politics that will determine that, and whether that, if that does happen, it certainly will impact the area, but the area has changed already. I think that as I explained, the culture, my sense of what the cultural sense of the community has dramatically changed in my lifetime. So yes, the area is much the same, and yes, the families are still in place, but don't mistake that change hasn't happened, because it has. And it will continue so. And we would just all hope to adapt to it, and yet try to maintain this wonderful sense that we have on a place like this, that we can come out and feel the privacy and the isolation that's so attractive out here.
The families that have been here have stayed here. You know, it's not like a lot of places where there's been a lot of turnover. I mean, somebody asked me a few years ago and said, well, what's land bringing down there? And I said, I don't know. None of it's ever sold for 15, 20 years. So we don't know. I mean, now some places are starting to sell, but not many of the old ranches. And some of the old ranches are selling, but not real many. You know, most of the families are pretty committed to staying here. Whether the next generation or not, well, I don't know. You know, there's a lot easier ways to make a buck.
I have never requested that any of my grandchildren or my son or my daughter seek what I felt was important for me. I mean, what I felt was important might not, been important for them, but as it turned out, that's what they've enjoyed the most.
I've just been here, and I feel lucky to have been here most of my life. And I still enjoy it.
We're not getting rich, but we're still here, and I guess that's as good as it gets, as the movie says.